President Biden on Taiwan.
What should Chinese President Xi know about your commitment to Taiwan?
We agree with what we signed on to a long time ago, and that there's a one China policy, that Taiwan makes their own judgments about their independence. We are not moving, we're not encouraging their being independent. We're not, that's their decision.
But would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
After our interview, a White House official told us U.S. policy has not changed. Officially, the U.S. will not say whether American forces would defend Taiwan.
Wait, what? The president just said they would. Who's in charge of the government? What?
But the commander-in-chief had a view of his own.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion.
Yes.
Chat, I could say right now that if there was an invasion of Taiwan, zero shot I would support fighting a war against China. That would be suicide for the planet. That's insane. Chaotic, thank you for the tier 1. China is significantly more powerful than Russia. Are you fucking crazy? When has CCP last fought? Oh yeah, when the Vietnamese military kicked their ass in the 70s. Are you literally comparing China in the 70s to China in 2022? It used to be one of the poorest countries per capita of the world, and now it's the second largest overall economy. What? Also, the difference between like Vietnam, which was the most battle-hardened army in the world at that point, versus the United States, whose primary military specialty is sitting behind a fucking screen. So no experience, therefore a bad army. The difference between China and the United States is they study other countries. Jesus fuck. Who wants some doomer pill shit? Who wants some doomer pill shit? The scariest climate science paper I've ever read. This is a new channel. Simon Clark, well, new to me, chat. They're obviously pretty popular. And I feel like they might actually be good, not liberal. All right, let's check it out.
Thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. This is a video about what... Thank you to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. This is a video about what I think might be the scariest climate science paper I've ever read. Imagine a bucket that has a hole in the bottom and is fed by a tap. If the flow of water out of the hole matches the flow in from the tap, the level of water in the bucket stays constant. If, however, there is an imbalance, the level will not stay constant. If the hole gets clogged and the flow through it decreases, but the inflow stays the same, then the level of water in the bucket will rise over time. Imagine, however, that in the walls of this bucket are some electrical wires, and these wires are connected to other taps. If the level of the water reaches these wires, there's a chance they could short circuit and turn on those extra taps. The level of the water would then increase much faster, and the water would be electrified. The bucket reached a tipping point. One behavior, a small imbalance in the water coming in and the water leaving.
This is the worst explanation of tipping point I've ever seen. A better example of a tipping point is, you know, when you're leaning back in your chair and you're kind of like wobbly, and then all of a sudden your center of gravity gets a little bit too far back and the chair falls over all at once really quickly. You are balanced, and then just the slightest bit overbalanced, and then bam, you hit a tipping point.
Causing the water level to rise led to a new behavior, a massive imbalance of water entering the bucket. The Earth's atmosphere is also currently experiencing
But I do love a Rube Goldberg machine. That's a good point. That's a good point. I take back my criticism. That was the best example I've ever seen. By the way, chat, thank you for the level 5 hype train. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. You guys are the best. And chat, by the way, like, as far as the ad thing goes, I for the longest time said no because the deal they were offering me was dog shit. And I'm not going to, even if it would be like a lot of money to most people, I'm not gonna try to like fuck you over for no money. I waited, I kept telling them no until they finally gave me a real offer that actually is like, okay, at this point I can't say no. Like, I feel sick to my stomach saying no at that point, you know what I mean? Like, I think about all the stuff that I could do for my family, and I'm like, all right, I have to say yes at this point. I can't say no now. What if I get banned next week? You know what I mean? So it's just the way it goes. I'll try not to make it suck.
Imbalance. Recently, a species
I lost my debit card. Can you front me? Absolutely not.
Mostly harmless, mostly hairless apes have started burning carbon deposits they found in the ground. The extra carbon this burning has put into the atmosphere has prevented some thermal energy from leaving the planet.
I exist. Of course, I have a mother and father and sisters. If you got banned next week, isn't the ad revenue nullified anyways? Yes. Yes. But they would pro-rata pay me. I also haven't accepted the deal yet. I'm just floating it to you first.
And that has increased the average temperature of the atmosphere. Historically, scientists have said that there's a pretty straightforward relationship between the amount of carbon in the Earth's atmosphere and its average temperature. The more carbon in the atmosphere, the more warming takes place, in a logarithmic fashion. But that idea was complicated in 2005 with the paper The Thinning of Arctic Sea Ice 1988 to 2003, Have We Passed a Tipping Point? By Lindsay and Zhang. This was, as far as I can tell, the first use of the phrase tipping point in climate literature, and was soon developed by legendary scientist James Hansen, and particularly in a 2008 paper by Tim Lenton et al. Incidentally, how we use the phrase tipping point in climate science has quite an interesting history. I'll leave a link to a paper below if you'd like to learn more. Suffice to say, I'm simplifying things for this video. Lenton et al. Describes tipping elements, parts of the Earth system which could, with just a nudge, be changed from one state to another, and would have a large effect on global climate if they did so. The point at which each tipping element changes from one state to another is the tipping point, and each point is specific to each element. Each tipping element then is like an exposed wire in the bucket, and the tipping point is how high each wire sits above the waterline. The 2008 paper highlighted 9 tipping elements which could impact world climate. Perhaps the best known of these is North Atlantic Deep Water Formation, which drives the thermohaline circulation, the big overturning circulation of water in the Atlantic Ocean. If sufficient meltwater entered the North Atlantic from Greenland, this deep water formation could be disrupted and the overturning circulation switched off. If this were to happen, the northern hemisphere could cool by several degrees Celsius, and there could be a return of Ice Age conditions to Europe. This effect was dramatized in the film The Day After Tomorrow. Now, in our analogy, this is like a wire short-circuiting, not adding an extra tap to the bucket, but drilling an extra hole in the bucket, which is incidentally what I wished had happened to my head whilst I was watching The Day After Tomorrow. However, the Lenton et al. Paper cites the IPCC assessment that this was, quote, very unlikely to happen before the year 2100, at least in a rapid manner. It was believed that climatic tipping points could be reached this century, particularly in Arctic sea ice melting and melting of the Greenland ice sheet, but that this was not likely. However, to quote the paper, given the large uncertainty that remains about tipping elements, there is an urgent need to improve our understanding of the underlying physical mechanisms determining their behavior, so that policymakers are able, quote, to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable. In other words, we knew there were wires in the bucket, but they were quite high above the rising waterline. We didn't know exactly.
By the way, chat, this is all not true. We've learned now that the water melt, the ice melt in the Greenland, for example, is a lot worse than we thought. It's happening a lot faster than we thought. We've seen ice melt in the Himalayas and in the mountains in the Asian subcontinent that are resulting in all sorts of massive flooding in Pakistan. We've seen loss of snowpack in the Sierras, which is exacerbating the drought in California and then the American West. We've seen rivers drying up all over Europe and China. We have the entire northern hemisphere is suffering massive droughts this year. From as far, Europe, China, we see massive floods in Pakistan. We see huge droughts in the American West. Climate is super fucked up right now.
We were, but we had no reason to believe we would hit them very soon. However, that was in 2008. This month, a new paper came out, which counted amongst its authors Tim Lenton, now at the University of Exeter, where I did my PhD. It had the incredibly sobering title, Exceeding 1.5 degrees C global warming could trigger multiple climate tipping points. The authors reviewed over 200 peer-reviewed papers published since 2008 to assess our state of knowledge of tipping points in the climate system, through paleoclimate data, through modern observations, and through the output of computer models. The result? They increased the number of potential tipping elements in the climate system from 9 to 16. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that they concluded we have already...
Quinn, Mike, have you seen Kiss the Ground? It's about the agricultural industry and how it can be changed to reverse a lot of the worst climate change effects. No, but I'm always very skeptical of like one quick thing that'll fix X big problem.
Warmed the planet to the point where 5 of those tipping elements could be triggered now. The wires may already be in the water, just waiting to short circuit. Collapse of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, widespread abrupt permafrost thaw, collapse of convection in the Labrador Sea, and massive die-off of tropical coral reefs are already possible at 1 degree of warming that we have already caused since pre-industrial times. And to be crystal clear, we don't think any of these tipping points have been reached yet. But if they are reached, there may be no going back. The changes may be self-sustaining. To quote Lenton, that means even if temperature stops rising, once the ice sheet, ocean, or rainforest has passed a tipping point, it will carry on changing to a new state. How long the transition takes varies from decades to thousands of years depending on the system. For example, ecosystems and atmospheric circulation patterns can change quickly, whilst ice sheet collapse is slower but leads to unavoidable sea level rise of several meters. Ice sheet collapse would eventually inundate coastal areas. Permafrost thaw would amplify our man-made warming, a collapse of the circulation in the Labrador Sea would bring the Ice Age back to Europe, and a die-off of tropical corals would destroy a key pillar of the marine ecosystem, and likely result in hundreds of millions of people losing their primary source of food. These are events that you could justifiably call apocalyptic. Further, if the planet warms by 1.5 degrees Celsius, then 5 more tipping points become possible, and 4 that were possible at 1 degree of warming become likely. And as I'm sure I don't need to remind you, we are not on track to limit warming to just 1.5 degrees. As I've covered in a previous video, under current government policies, we're looking at maybe 3.2 degrees of warming by the year 2100. If all the pledges...
Hey, Mike, in Climate Apocalypse, do you want to be in a heat wave or the Ice Age? Cold is more deadly, usually. But with proper preparation, you can survive it.
Made at COP26 are perfectly converted into action, maybe 1.8 degrees of warming. Currently, we are walking towards a cliff edge that is crumbling into the sea, and the ground could fall away from us at any moment, yet we still plan to keep walking right up to the edge. This is the point in a normal video where I would try and writing it to pull things out of the bag and weave these conclusions together into something that's kind of satisfying, and you leave the video feeling all right. But yeah, I can't do that today. I've read a lot of papers in climate science, and I've read about a lot of bad news in climate science. But for some reason, this paper chilled my blood. I think it's because I still think of the climate as being something that we are in control of. It's something that we are forcing with our emissions of greenhouse gases, and so something that we could stop forcing if we wanted to. We could stop warming the planet. But this paper says that that isn't always the case. Our hands are on the wheel up to a point, beyond which we are powerless to stop what happens next. If the planet sets itself down a path that makes it uninhabitable for humans, whether that's in millennia or in decades, there's nothing we can do about it. And I don't know about you, but I find that terrifying. So if this paper says anything at all, it's that every 1/10 of a degree counts. Every 1/10 of a degree that we can avoid warming the planet is important. Every step we can avoid taking towards that crumbling cliff edge is worth fighting for. At the moment, we still have our hands on the wheel. We still have control of our destiny. We haven't crossed any of these tipping points yet. But the fact is, we are simply not doing enough to be confident of avoiding an uninhabitable Earth. So while we still have the power to do so,
there's lowering of magnetic field strength, which allows more radiation and lower radio frequencies on the Earth's surface. Wait, really? There's a fear. Is that just like a separate thing that might happen, or is that related to climate change? They think carbon is going to change the magnetic field. I thought that was due to the iron core of the planet. It doesn't sound like it would be. The pole flipping thing just happens every amount of time. No, it's because angles. Okay, that makes sense, buddy. Chinese character, thank you for the 15 months. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. There can be a sudden shift of the poles, which might weaken the magnetic field. Just one category 1 hurricane can cause this much damage. Yeah, we're going to talk about Puerto Rico here in a bit. That's what I was transitioning to. Puerto Rico was my next topic.
About it. I don't think a smooth segue into a sponsor would be appropriate for this video, so I would really appreciate if you could just stick around for a minute to hear a bit about Brilliant, who made this video possible. Brilliant have been a long-time supporter of this channel, and that's because they are the perfect fit for people that like watching my videos. They are all about improving your understanding of maths, science, and computer science through gorgeously illustrated interactive courses, available on a website and in an app. Brilliant offers courses across a huge range.
Okay. Ads are bad. I mean, ads are great. What do I mean? What do I mean? Twitch, don't change my deal. The pole reversal just happens. It has nothing to do with climate change. It's an unrelated phenomenon. It's happened many times in human history, 183 times in the past 83 million years. How long do you think humans have been around, bro? Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.